Hey, St. Mary's, it's Father Will here. As you can probably tell by my voice, I'm a little under the weather. I'm getting better, and I really appreciate all your prayers. I just wanted to share with y'all. I had kind of made most of my homily already by the time I got sick, and so I kind of finished that out for this past weekend, and I figured that you guys might like to have it, especially since we're kind of going to do a homily series about being called and chosen over the next few weeks. You know, friends, I'm struck by this fact that often in life we're faced with the idea of having to choose between hearing good or bad news, right? If someone says, I've got some good news and some bad news, which do you typically choose? Well, today I'm going to begin with the bad news. I'm going to begin with the bad news. When we look around the world, we see many challenging and depressing signs that things are broken, right? That many things are broken. Something is fundamentally wrong with the world, in fact, we might say. Among our young people in the United States, nearly 1 in 3 experience some sort of mental health challenge. Rates of suicide amongst young people, for example, are up. Rates of other more minor mental illnesses are up, and all sorts of things like that are happening. On a broader cultural scale, also, we see the polarization of the society in which we live. And I don't have to say much about that for you to understand what I'm saying, right? Like, there's just this rampant polarization that affects all of our lives. Moreover, we see that within the church, even like, lamentably within the body of Christ, there's a lot of division, and we have to deal with that. We also find in ourselves, within our hearts, something wrong. We often fail to love as we know that we ought. We often are trapped in our own, what von Balthasar calls ego drama, the I drama, where I'm the star of my own show. Now, I think one of the temptations that we can have based on all of that bad news is to kind of think that we're the first generation to experience such things. And I think that we ought to avoid that temptation. We got to avoid the temptation of historical conceit to think that we're the first generation to experience such horrific things. In fact, St. Augustine once said that every generation thinks that it's the worst time to live, generally speaking. Now, he may not be true that may not be true in every sense, but it certainly gives us pause to think about what we're saying with that. Certainly, our time is difficult, and it's different than any other time that's come before. And we can admit that at the same time, certain vices and challenges seem to be more or less prevalent than in other times. But on the whole, we have, I think, much more in common with those who have lived throughout history than perhaps we like to admit. Now, this is notably true in the reading that we heard in the first reading this past Sunday, in the life of Samuel. Just before the reading we have for that day, we hear in the book of Samuel of the wickedness of the sons of Eli. Eli, you remember, is Samuel's kind of mentor, his foster father in a certain sense. Hannah gives Samuel over to the Lord as a gift, and Eli raises him from the time he's very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord, yes, but the sons of Eli, the man to whom he had been entrusted, were horrific. In fact, it says in the book of Samuel that they were abusing women entrusted to their care who ministered at the temple of the Lord. Now, young Samuel may have seen Eli reprimand his sons, but with no effect and without teeth. Eli, good as he was, failed. He failed in his duty towards his sons to reprimand them quickly, and he failed to remove them from service for their transgressions. He failed to protect the flock entrusted to his care. And this certainly had repercussions in Eli's life, as we find out later in the book of Samuel, but it also, we can imagine that it probably affected Samuel's own life. There was probably a brokenness there that maybe we don't understand completely, but that is present in the life of young Samuel. He was not immune from such influence. In fact, the message that God gives him after he says, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening," cannot be easy for him to hear, for it prophesies the destruction of the house of Eli on account of its wickedness. Now, friends, let's turn to some good news, right? So with all of that in mind, with the fact that we're not immune from evil, and that we shouldn't think that we're the only time period in history where evil has come, we need to turn to the good news. First regarding Samuel, and then for us. For in a certain way, they're the same type of good news. See, into this mess, God comes and he calls Samuel. He calls him to be a great prophet. He calls him to holiness, and he has set him apart for a great service. And despite Samuel's brokenness, right, or maybe even perhaps because of Samuel's brokenness, God calls him. Samuel is not so fundamentally broken as to be unable to say, "Here I am, Lord," and with a little help to say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." In every human person, no matter how broken we are, no matter what our past has in it, no matter what the examples that we look up to showed us or failed to show us, we have the ability to respond to God's call to follow him, to say, "Here I am, Lord," like Samuel, or to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." It's what theologians call an obediential potency. We are capax Dei, capable of God, only by his grace, of course, but nonetheless really capable. It is only in actualizing this capacity, only in making this capacity real, in actually using it, that the restlessness of our hearts will be brought to rest. See, the same is true, that was true of Samuel, is also true of the apostles, whose call we get to hear of in today's gospel. These men Jesus called were a motley crew. They were really a mess. Yet he chose them to offer to the world the good news. But before that, he invited them, first of all, to be with him. Notice he says to them, "Come and see, you will come and you will see." He desires them first to be in his presence, like the young Samuel who ministered in the temple of the Lord, who made his abode in the temple of the Lord. Jesus calls his disciples, and that includes us, to be with him first. Before he asks us to do anything, he asks us to be with him. Next week, we're going to talk about the call to mission and how we're called by name to some specific vocation, some way of holiness. But the first thing we have to recognize before that mission is that all of us are called to be with him. This, friends, is the good news. God continues to call and to choose in the midst of our broken world, in the midst of our own brokenness. God still calls us. He calls us in our brokenness first to be with him. When you were baptized, this call to holiness, for holiness is best defined as being with God, was given to you in a profound way. Yes, friends, we live in a broken world and we ourselves are broken. But we are also chosen and called. God gave his Son to show that he loves us and to make it possible for our restless hearts to respond. So will you do that? Here's my challenge for you this week. Take 5 minutes each day and be silent and acknowledge your brokenness before the Lord and respond to his invitation, saying as the young Samuel did, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Guys, I'm praying for you, and I can't wait to see you next week as we celebrate Called by Name Sunday in the Diocese of Austin. One thing that I'd ask is that you just pray also for all those who are discerning a call to religious life or to priesthood, especially from our parish. God knows that we need more priests and we need more religious. So God bless you, and we'll see you next week.